Hello, the Salty Outdoorsman here, and it's springtime in New England, and a lot of us are getting back into getting outdoors and camping and bushcrafting and doing all the things that we love. And fortunately for myself, I didn't stop doing that all winter. I spent more time out here this winter than I probably will this summer. We did a lot of camping out here, a lot of winter camping, and went to the island a couple times and camped out in the snow, and then we had the great blizzard of 2026. That was pretty exciting, but anyways, you know, here we are again. We're in the season. I've been spending a lot of time thinking, and thinking a lot about the traditional system that we have with the 10 C's, the 5 C's and the 10 C's, and put some thought into it, and I took some notes and wrote some things down. So I kind of wanted to dive into that a little bit here, and I kind of scripted things out a little bit that'll, you know, so it'll make it a little easier for me to follow along. So I'm going to read off of it here, but you know, there's a pattern I keep seeing in survival systems. We often try to force them to land on a round number like the 5 C's and the 10 C's, mainly for symmetry and memorization. But nature doesn't care about numbers like humans do, and when you actually break it down into the things that are essential in a survival situation, the number stabilizes at 8. So I started rethinking it, and this is the system that I've kind of come up with, the 8 C's plus 1. You know, the logical categorical system comes down to the 8 C's of survival plus the one cognitive layer that is widely overlooked, comprehension. Comprehension equals knowledge, and knowledge equals skills, judgment, awareness, decision-making, reasoning, and common sense, probably the most critical of all. So in reality, this category should be number 1 in the list, I believe, because without it, all the other tools in your bag are meaningless. Then we move into the 8 physical C's: cutting, combustion, container, cover, cordage, care, compass, and candling device. And then after that, it starts getting a little wishy-washy, you know. I feel like we try to force it into 10, like I said, to hit that round number or to be symmetrical or whatever. So to break these further down, you know, cutting is a knife or cutting tools, your trusted tool. Combustion is fire starting. Container is water storage, or even a backpack could be a container that carries your gear and essential tools. Then we have cover. Cover is shelter. Even the clothing that you wear is a form of shelter, and having the proper clothing on is your first line of defense. Then moving on, we have cordage. Cordage, I relate that to connectivity. Cordage connects things together and makes tools that are usable. You can make shelters, you can make rafts. So cordage equates to connectivity. Care. I call it care because it starts with a C and it kind of fits in the categories, and I think that would be the next thing in line. Care would be first aid and hygiene. You know, you've got to take care of yourself when you're out here, not only hygienically wise, but first aid. You know, you got to have first aid to cover if you get hurt, have an injury, and all that kind of stuff. So beyond that, then we start moving into the next category. I would say would be compass equals navigation. You know, you want to know where you're at out here, and you want to be able to get out of a situation if you become lost. And then the next thing in the line would be candling device, which is light source. You know, and then after that, you know, is where things kind of get a little, I don't know, we try to force them into the next 10 C's. So I think that the thing really, in all reality, limits out at 8 C's, hardcore. And but let's kind of cover this again a little bit right off the top. The 8 C's plus 1. Plus 1 is comprehension. Like I said, knowledge. That's the foundational cognitive layer that includes skills, judgment, situational awareness, decision making. reasoning and common sense, like we said a little while ago. Without comprehension, the tools in your pack are only objects, and knowledge is what turns the equipment into capability. You know, you can have all the latest, greatest gear and gadgets and things like that when you're out here, but if you don't have the knowledge behind them, they're going to be useless to you. So, even the best guys out here, you could put them out here with nothing, and they're going to figure out a way to make it happen. They're going to figure out a way to survive. So, with that being said, I think that, that should be at the top of the list before we even start the 5 C's, 8 C's, 10 C's. So keep that in mind. So basically, we'll go back into the physical C's, as we mentioned earlier, and usually a cutting tool is a knife or an other edged implement used to process materials, prepare food, construct shelters and things like that. You know, the knife is probably one of your most essential tools out here. In fact, if you asked everybody in the lineup what's the first thing you're going to grab, it's probably going to be a knife. It's probably the most useful and trusted companion out here. Combustion, I would say, would be definitely probably next in the list. Fire starting, the ability to create heat, purify water, cook foods, signal for rescue, and support morale. Fire is a crucial thing out here to keep your core body temperature, and it's just good for everything. The ambiance and cooking over the fire. It's one of the greatest things we do out here, I think. Without fire, I don't think spending time out here and doing this kind of stuff would be as much fun as it is. It's one of the things, I always grew up with, sitting around the fire and things like that. It's just one of those things that you can't match. It's kind of magical, and primitive, So fire was the next in the list. Container. Water storage, a vessel for collecting, transporting, and or purifying water and storing water. Water is critical out here. You need it to survive, and water's heavy. It's hard to carry it. So you want to have different devices for carrying your water, and you want to have a way to process it. Containers, you've got pots, and you've got stainless steel bottles and things like that to help you process waters. And then you can dive deeper into it after that. You've got tablets and things like that, and then you have water filters and purification systems and stuff like that going further down the line. All right, so the next thing, cover. Cover equals shelter, protection from wind, rain, snow, sun, and temperature extremes, exposure. Exposure is what can kill you out here. If the conditions are perfect, everything's fine. You don't have anything to worry about generally, but the conditions are what can get you into trouble. Cold or heat is where you get into trouble. So cover is, like I said, one of the most important things. And as I mentioned a minute ago, starting with the clothing that you wear. If you have proper clothing on and even rain gear, one of the strongest things that I would suggest having in your setup is a nice piece of rain gear, whether it be a rain suit, pants, and a coat, or a poncho, or whatever you have. It's critical that you have that with you, because that's what keeps you functional. If it's raining, you're in camp and it's raining, you still have chores that you have to do. There's still things that you have to do. And if you have proper rain gear, you can still get out and function and do that kind of stuff. So your first line of defense is your clothing. After that, then you have tarps. You have tents, and then you have natural shelters. You can get out here and build things and create shelters and stuff like that. So shelter, very important in the line of C's here. Next we have cordage, and cordage equals connectivity. This means to bind, repair, secure, suspend, and integrate materials into functional systems. with cordage, cordage is kind of limitless to the things that you can do with it. You can build structures, you can tie things together, you can make traps, you can, it's endless. So you always want to make sure that you have cordage in your kit. There's different kinds. You've got paracord, you've got bank line, and different things like that. So each has its different uses and things like that. So cordage, a very essential thing to have with you at all times. And I guess the next thing we go into is care. Like I said, care equals first aid and hygiene. We covered this a minute ago. Treatment of injuries, prevention of infection, and maintenance of health in general. When you're out here, you've got to be cautious of what you're doing, and be aware of your surroundings. And, when you're working around fire or processing firewood and things like that, take your time and think about what you're doing and try not to get hurt. It's not always the case. Sometimes you do end up getting an injury or something like that, but do the best you can to avoid that. And because, once you get into a situation where you have an injury, then things take a turn at that point. Even a small injury like a cut on your hand or something like that makes it hard to do just everyday tasks and things like that. But then if you get into a bigger injury, now you're in serious trouble. So you want to have first aid, and then on the hygiene side of it, if you're out here for an extended period of time, you want to take care of yourself. Keep yourself clean and things like that. Not only does it make you feel good and feel good about yourself, but it just keeps your spirits up, morale and things like that. Okay, so the next thing in line is a compass. Compass equals navigation, orientation, and route finding to avoid disorientation and conserve energy. A lot of times, even the simplest hike can turn into a disaster, and often does for a lot of people. They take off with minimal stuff. There's people, you read stories or see stories all the time where people take off on a simple little day hike with a day pack, maybe a granola bar and some water or something like that, and think they're going to be gone for a couple hours, and you get into a situation where you see something interesting and you go to explore it, and the next thing you know, you're turned around, and then anxiety kicks in, and you don't sit down and reason and think things out, and next thing you know, you're lost or looking at the potential of spending the night in an outdoor situation. So that's why you always want to have these bases covered and have these things with you. And compass and proper maps of the area, charts and things like that are a good thing to have, and know how to use them, understand how to use them. And the first thing that's going to do is keep you from getting into that situation in the first place. So very important. And then the next thing, logically in line, I believe, is a candling device, which equals light source, illumination for travel, camp tasks, emergency signaling, and safety in darkness. I spend a lot of time in the outdoors, and I would say a big percentage of it is at night. I'm always out here trucking around at night, especially in hunting season and things like that. I'm just always out here, and I got to say, I've got really good night vision, and rarely do I use a flashlight out here. I like to let my eyes adjust and do things naturally. But when you're in camp, you definitely need a flashlight. If you get into a situation where you're on a hike and it's taking longer than you think to get back to where you started, you might be looking at hiking at night. So a flashlight's going to be helpful for a couple things, helping you to see where you're going and keep you from having an injury. Also in camp, just basic tasks, cooking and getting things out of your pack, and then getting firewood. You get to camp late at night, especially if you're hiking or canoeing or something like that. I remember there's times where we were in the boundary waters and things like that, and sometimes the day got long, or you saw cool stuff and you spent more time exploring than you thought you were going to, and you got into camp late, and it's nice to always have a light source. And luckily, things are so much nicer nowadays, light-wise. They're more compact and smaller. The battery life is longer. Back in the day, we used to carry these big flashlights and heavy batteries and things like that, and it was a little bit of a burden. But now with some of the equipment that they have, you can get a pretty small flashlight that's really bright, lasts a long time, they're rechargeable and things like that. So a candling device, light source, a very, very important factor to have. But then once you, get to to the end of the list there. That's kind of the end of the line of extremely functional physical items. Then we start going into things like cotton and sailing needles and things like that, which are great. They're useful tools, but I don't think they're survival tools. They're convenience tools, you know. I've never been in a situation where I had to sew something to keep me alive, or, you know, rarely do I even carry a sewing kit. I do in some of my larger kind of bug out packs or whatever, something like that. But, you know, those things are kind of convenience items. I think when we start getting that far down to the list, we start going into convenience rather than the core basics of what you really need to function out there. And that seems to kind of top out at 8. And I've put a lot of thought into this, and maybe you have as well. And if you've come up with something that I've overlooked or missed, let me know. Let me know in the comments or whatever, because I've searched hard to think of what is in the next in line after those 8 C's that is critical to have with you, and a kind of a must-have thing. I can't seem to come up with it, so maybe you've got better ideas than I do. So anyways, if you have that, yeah, share it with us. So so why are 8 categories functionally complete? These 8 physical categories correspond to distinct survival functions. Number 1, material processing. Number 2, energy generation. Number 3, water management. Number 4, environmental protection. Number 5, structural integration. Number 6, health maintenance. Number 7, direction and orientation. And number 8, illumination. So together they address the core practical requirements of wilderness survival. None is redundant, and each one represents a unique capability. So I tend to kind of put them in order sometimes of priority, but in reality they're all essential, and they're all critical. And you know, I've done some videos on my day pack and what I have in there, and it pretty much covers those 8 categories, and I never leave without them. If I'm going to go out on a simple day hike, you know, they're in there, and I've got them reduced to a level where they're not heavy. I have exactly what I need. I don't over carry, but I don't under carry either. I always make sure that all those bases are covered, and every time you set out on a hike, you should have those things with you in case you do excuse me, get into a situation, you know, you've got the bases covered. So all right, so why comprehension comes first. Although listed as +1, comprehension is the true foundation of the system. Knowledge determines what to carry, when to use each tool, how to improvise, which risks to prioritize, when to conserve resources, and how to avoid preventable mistakes. You know, it kind of comes down to common sense, and then over time, wisdom. You know, I know a lot of people watching these channels, you know, they're new at this, and they're starting off, and they're learning things, and, you know, we all started somewhere. I, as well as many of you out there, have been doing this many years, you know, basically all my life, and over time you learn, and trial and error and things like that. You come up with your own ways of doing things, but you gain wisdom over time. And trial and error are some things you try and you fail at, or you get out in a situation and you get caught in a bad storm and things like that. And you learn from those kind of experience. So, you know, I've always said throughout the years, especially going on the long trips up in the boundary waters and stuff like that, we'd be out for, you know, 10 to 14 days at a time, and you don't remember the beautiful, calm, sunny day where you're just sitting around and swimming or whatever. You remember the storm that kicked your ass, and I always looked at it like that. You know, those are and to me, those were the most exciting times. You know, just the days where you sat around camp and just did normal stuff, yeah, that was all fun and everything. But you know, the storms that you know, kicked your ass, and you know, getting caught in something in the middle of the night, or out on the lake while you're canoeing and things like that. Those are the things that stick with you, and you know, a lot of memories of those kind of things, and what we had to do to get out of those situations. And you know, I've been in some pretty tough situations a few times, and hey, we always managed to make it make it out of them because you know, we had a little bit of knowledge behind us and things like that. But you know, over time you want to practice and get out here and do this thing, and you'll gain skills and things like that, and you'll be prepared when the time comes that you need it. It's you know, I was kind of equate it to sailing. I'm a sailor. And I remember when I started sailing, and I haven't been sailing all my life. You know, I started later in life, but I've done a lot of sailing. I actually sailed all over, you know, the Caribbean and across the Atlantic and Panama and different places like that. But I always say, you know, anybody can sail, but it's the guys that can get you out of a situation when things get tough. That's when it counts. You know, anybody can get out there and sail on a perfectly nice day when you got calm winds and things like that. It's fun, it's easy, but boy, when things take a turn, you really have to have your act together to know how to get out of that situation. And same thing with being outdoors in situations like this. Things can turn real quick, and next thing you know, you end up in a situation you weren't expecting. So having that knowledge behind you just helps you get out of those situations. All right, where are we at in the list here? Let's see here. I don't know, I feel like we're kind of getting towards the end of it. I've got a few different sheets here that I printed out, and like I said, I just kind of wanted to read off of these things just to kind of keep things scripted a little bit and not overlook something. But anyways, you know, hope you enjoyed this. Hope you took a little bit of something away from it. Same thing when it comes to gear. You know, use whatever you have to get out here and get started. You don't always have to have the latest, greatest, everything. You know, gear is expensive, and sometimes it takes time to acquire it. And start off with the important things first. You know, save your money. Get yourself a good knife. You know, a knife is something you're going to have with you hopefully for the rest of your life if you get something nice, you know. And it's going to be one of those things over time. It's going to become your trusted companion, and you're going to look back at the experiences you've had with that thing and the different things that you've done with it over the years and things like that. So it's a, you know, great tool to have in your pack. But you know, start off with whatever you can afford, but over time you build on things. And my gear is always continuously evolving, and you know, I try different things, and I'll swap things out according to seasonal situations as well, and also the environment you're going to be in. And depending on where you're at, you bring different tools, or the seasons, or the length of time that you're going to be out. It might dictate what you bring. And but yeah, you know, start slow, build your kit. Make sure you have the core things covered. You know, you want to have a good knife, you want to have a nice fire kit, you know, containers. Everybody's got containers. We all know what they are. Over time, save your money and, you know, get some good rain gear and things like that. Cordage is simple. Everybody's got that. It's cheap and inexpensive. Get yourself a good headlamp and flashlight and stuff like that. And, you know, a nice tarp and things like that. And over time, you'll figure out what you need. You'll build your kit, and you'll get there. You'll figure out what you need. So, all right. Well, anyways, that's about it. I'm going to wrap it up here. I've been rambling on for a little while. Hope you enjoyed this and took a little something away from it. But hey, it's that time of year again. Get out and start enjoying things. So, all right. Salty here. Over and out.